friends. This is the Be Real Babe podcast, a place where your average babes come together to talk about life stresses, messes, and successes. A place where being yourself is the ultimate goal, where your opinion, your story, and your individual experience matters. Join me, your host B, and my guests for real and raw talks every week, laying it all out there so we can all help each other learn more, grow deeper, and evolve collectively. Now keep in mind, as a disclaimer, no one here is an expert and no one is giving any advice. This is strictly our opinions, thoughts, feelings, and for entertainment purposes only. Now with that being said, it's time. So grab your drink, grab your joint, and let's jump right in. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Be Real Babe podcast. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for stopping by the show today. I hope that you have a good time. And if you're a returning listener, watcher, supporter, thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart for coming back time and time again. For those that don't know me, my name is Brandy. I am the host of the show, and today you guys are on episode 196, Keeping Up with Canada, part 11. 11. I can't even believe it. And 4 episodes away from 200. This is insane. I can't even believe it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys as always. I have such a good episode coming up for you, talking all about Canada with my friend Christopher from the Open Minds podcast. This is his 3rd time on the show. So if you do want to go back, you can find him in episode 163 and episode 172. In 163, I talked to Christopher of what it's like to speak out in Canada and his podcast and his whole experience and journey with that. And then in 172, it is actually part 6 of Keeping Up with Canada, where we talk about things like maids and the online censorship bill and just kind of where Canada was then. And then today, we're going to talk about so much more in the Canadian political field and everything that's going on and how we feel. It's just such a great episode, you guys. But before we jump on to that, I just want to remind you, if you are watching on YouTube or Rumble, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Comment for engagement if you can. It helps me out so much, you guys. I see my little YouTube channel growing, so I really appreciate it. You guys are finding the new channel and not liking the old one anymore, so thank you. And also, if you are listening on Spotify or Apple, you can also turn on notifications and leave a review if you're feeling spicy today. And you can also find me on social media at the Be Real Babe or the Be Real Babe podcast on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Pinterest. Now, you guys, as always, if you have a story, an episode, anything you want to talk about, please hurry into my DMs because I am quickly filling up for this season. I only have about 6 episodes left that I can book with guests, so please make sure if you would like to be on the show, let me know. I love to talk to y'all. Okay, I'm going to shut the fuck up and we're going to get to this amazing episode with Christopher. Let's go. All right, babes, it's time to get on to the show. And with me today, I have a very special guest joining me for his 3rd time. I'd like to welcome the host of the Open Minds podcast, Christopher, to the show. Hey, friend, how's it going?
Brandy, always a pleasure when our
Good
paths cross.
morning.
Thanks for the invite. Like, I know it's super early for you, so thank you.
Oh, I know. You're like, I'm an early person. I'm like, oh shit, so am I. And then I'm like, wait, he's got 3 hours on you. That means you have to be extra early.
You know, I went for my run. I have my coffee. I'm like, oh yeah, like this is gonna be great. I'm all wired up, and then I'm like, wait a minute, she's 3 hours behind. But
Girl got up and crimped her hair so that she looks somewhat awake, so the bed head kind of looks like it's stylish, you know? But honestly, this is when I'm the sassiest, is first thing in the morning, so that's why I'm like, you know what? It's like very unfiltered B. I haven't been able to smoke a ton of weed yet, so it's like the most unfiltered version of me, so 6 a.m. recordings I'm here for
I love that. I absolutely love that.
I always think about that too. I get on first thing when I do my cardio on my bike, and that's when I'm like the most opinionated. I'm like, oh girl, you can tell you've not wake and baked yet because you were being mean. And sometimes I'll delete it. So unless you're like in Ontario watching me or an early bird like me, you don't get to see those like unfiltered rants. But speaking of, proud of you for like definitely coming out and owning your opinions and being a little bit more sassy online lately. How's that feeling?
It's feeling great. You know, I've started doing live streams on TikTok, and they have been
You brave!
spicy. They have been spicy. Oh my god.
Bro, I'm so scared of TikTok. It's not even funny. I told my mom I don't want to go viral. Like, I truly do not. I like just want a handful of people to watch my shit and be like,
yeah,
that's it.
100%.
Like, how do you do it? How do you handle it? Has it been like Canadians, or do you feel like it's been like just people?
You know, there is a large underbelly of Canadians who feel so disconnected from politics. Like their voices have not been heard at all, and they're absolutely terrified of
Yep.
saying anything. So when I do the live streams and I talk about, the influx of international students here in
Mhm.
Toronto, it has changed entire neighborhoods.
Yes.
And we can't not talk about it.
Mm-mm.
And I think it goes against Canadians' natural kind of nice, polite demeanor.
Mhm.
But I think deep down, there's so many Canadians who have legit concerns. And it's not that they're
Yes.
racist, xenophobic. It's just there are concerns. They're not being
Mhm.
addressed, they're not being
Mhm.
rectified. And what that
Mhm.
actually does to a lot of Canadians is either they move away from those communities or they like develop a deeper resentment towards immigrants as a whole. And
Yeah.
it's just, I don't think it's healthy for our country. I think we have to kind of like dig into it a little bit and bring it to the
Mhm.
surface. So that's what I found
Yes.
in my live streams. People message me. I got this long email from someone saying, I wish I could say what you think to my wife or to my friends or to my family. And just like, it breaks my heart how many people are self censoring themselves in
Yes.
Canada for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and I hate to bring it back to this, but I feel like it's about everything is boiled down to politics now. And it's like
Yeah.
you can't have a conversation without like having an opinion without you being labeled something. And then people are so
Yeah.
afraid to be, well, don't be labeled as a Trump supporter, or don't be on the opposite side,
Yeah.
don't be like in Kamala, like, or even like in
Yeah.
Canada, like, and I'm really for people, if you truly have an answer to why you're supporting something and it's solid, like not solid, but like to you and you can explain it, I'm
Hmm.
all for that. I can respect people having differences. I hope for it. I want us to have differences.
Of
But the thing
course.
right now, it's like, if you have those differences, it means you hate each other. And I just do not understand.
Exactly.
So, to your point, it's like, there's a lot of delicate conversations that need to be had, but because people don't understand duality, it's either one side or the other, or it's this or it's that. You can't have a conversation. And because we're overloaded with information and humans are not meant to have this much information, and we don't
Hmm.
maybe sometimes know how to regulate and ground, we're then just reacting. And then we just have this reactive space where no one even wants to have a question that might not fall in the mainstream narrative because they're going to get canceled. So then they're in our
Right.
DM saying, "Thanks for being honest, thanks for being real." And we're like, "Cool, yeah, but can you like help because we need more people." Like, great, that's great that you're
Yeah.
having these thoughts. That's awesome. Like,
Yeah.
what can we do to encourage others to say those things, And I think it's just baby steps. You don't have to like jump on people and be mad at them for not agreeing, but I think like like questioning, like, why do you think that? Like, let and being open to listening to the answer is also important, right? Like,
100%. I
this
think that,
immigration thing is huge and people are
yeah.
scared to talk about it. So thank you for also talking about that, because I also feel like that's a space I'm like, girl, I will say, like, in my mind, I'm like, you're too white to talk about this. You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
not, but you know what I mean? That's
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
narrative in my head that I have absorbed from listening to the mainstream narrative of like, you don't get to say that
Hmm.
because you'll be racist for saying that, which we know is not true. But
Yeah. And I feel like I'm in this position of being able to say it because we will may think that I'm okay to say it because I am. My parents and my family are first generation immigrants.
for sure.
Um, but I think also there's this also added responsibility for us too. So like
That's
one thing I've noticed in the live streams have been people will share, they'll be very open, very honest about, the changes they've seen in their communities.
mhm.
But it does dovetail into like those people are like low class Indians from a really rough part and they don't care and we should send them back. Like it can dovetail into hate very quickly.
100%.
And so I think there's this like ability for us to bring out the different perspectives, but also be
Mhm.
responsible in saying, okay, like now this is getting a bit too, this is un-Canadian. This is
Yes.
not like the welcoming Canadian environment. This
Yeah.
is becoming more toxic. And so I think there's a responsibility there as a moderator, I guess, but
Mhm.
I do think that there's a delicate approach. I think what mainstream media has done has shunned these voices, these
Mhm.
views completely.
Mhm.
CBC, for example, doesn't allow comments on their articles, which is, I don't think that's the appropriate response. I think there should be moderation, but I don't think an
Totally.
appropriate response is to shut down debate and discussion.
I
So
think
I
it
think
brings more anger when they don't do that, right? Like if you're wanting to
correct.
have adult discourse, you got to have it, like you said, in
Yeah,
moderation. But when you
right.
start taking that ability away, then people start getting pent up, and then they lash out, and then they feel like they're not being heard, and then in their mind, it's just
Hmm.
pushing forward that, let's say, another minority, another group is getting protected more than their ability to at least have a conversation. And I think the anger progresses, like you said, the resentment builds where there should be no resentment. There should be education and conversation. When it's not, it's being divided and labeled, and it's and no discussion is being able to be had for multiple reasons. And then more anger persists. And like you said, I hate it. I get so frustrated. It's like, we do need to have a discussion, but some of y'all take it way too racist. Like, there it is there too. Like, so
Hmm.
we could say that there is conversation to be had about the seriousness of it, and the like, not disrespect, but not understanding of Canadian culture, I think, to
Yeah,
versus like there is also people saying shit like that, and I cannot stand it. You know
yeah,
what I'm saying? Like,
100%.
duality can exist, and I think people struggle to understand that because it's too complex. It's a very complex situation. It's easier to just one or the
100%.
other, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. We can talk about immigration, especially when it comes to international students, in a respectful way. Um,
Exactly.
but it does, like you say, dovetail into like racism,
Hmm.
xenophobia, and other things. And so
Hmm.
there is a responsible way to do that. And I think that in Canada, we've gone too extreme in not talking about it. And it's not just immigration. There's tons of
No. Oh
topics we
gosh,
don't
yes.
talk about. Um,
Some
and
of
I
us.
think, right? Exactly, some of us. And I think that that changes our public square fundamentally. It changes our
Yes.
psyche fundamentally when we don't
Yes.
talk about things.
Yes, and I feel like it gets trapped inside. And I think that's just everything. It's like, and I think a lot of things are dysregulation in the world, maybe not
Hmm.
as much as illnesses, because we're not getting things out. We're not regulating properly. Like I said earlier, I think that there's so much information that we're overwhelmed, and specifically in the politics area, because everything is so politicized, that I think people are getting so fucking tired of it, that when it actually comes to politics, where we need to be paying attention, we need to be looking into, people are tired and they're overwhelmed. Like, even myself, being someone that likes to actually get super nerdy and look into these things a little bit more, I am exhausted. I am confused. Even just looking into how legislature works, looking how the parliaments work, working how government works, I'm exhausted. I have to jump around to 6 different Wikipedia pages. I also learned in French immersion. Okay, so give me some breaks. I forgot French and I forgot everything.
Nice.
So when I go back to learn this shit, think about putting your kids in French immersion. Like, truly think about it before you do it. But I just think people that don't have time to do this because they have kids, they're trying to have two jobs, they have homes to take care of. I have cats, right? I can't imagine them having time looking into the bills that are going to be changing their lives entirely. And they're
Hmm.
relying on these mainstream media sources just tell them what's up, or they're just going through and reading highlights, but they're not understanding the true effects of some of these things that are happening. So then when it comes to voting, when it comes to talking about that, they just fight with these big points of being like, oh, immigration's getting a little out of control. Maybe conservatives have a better approach to that. It's like, no, they're a racist. They want to kick them all out. And it's like, have you even read any of their fucking policies? Not saying
Yeah,
conservatives specifically. I'm just talking like
of course.
in general, right? Like, people aren't
Yeah.
actually looking, they're just hearing that. But when you go and look at the actual policies, I don't see those on some of the websites, on both
Hmm.
sides, right? So
Yeah, of course.
do you feel that that's the same, that people are just overloaded with information, so that when and the everything being politicized, that when it comes to what we actually need to focus on, people are just not doing it?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when we're dealing with the population that's very, anxious, stressed, and depressed, and we have information overload and we have a lot of anger in our society, that lends itself to the leaders we elect.
Yes.
When you look at the leaders, Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh, and Pierre Polyev is the natural, I think, reaction to a Justin Trudeau who's gone a
Mhm.
bit too far left.
A little bit.
But I don't think, right? I don't think any of those three leaders necessarily are the kind of aspirational, they
Leader.
don't necessarily embody that aspirational kind of goal setting that, you know, a Canadian would want to get to, which is moderate policy making.
Hmm.
Um, Thinking of Canada 50 to 100 years from now.
Yeah.
When I listen to politicians today, it's very much like what will get me elected in the next election. And there's nothing, no forethought about Canada in the world stage and how things are shifting. And you see leaders across the world in other regions who are really thinking like, after I'm dead and gone, there will be
Yeah.
this project that lives on. that will benefit our community and our people. And sadly, a lot of those projects are in some of the most um, dictatorial, rigid, harsh environments, and yet those leaders are thinking about,
Hmm.
the continuation of their country. And I just wish Canadian politicians would think more long term
Yeah.
and not towards the next election cycle. I think
Yeah.
in many ways, like our election cycle is undoing our ability to stay competitive as
Hmm.
well as think innovative in innovative ways. I've always had this idea, we have so much oil and gas, like why don't we think like 50 to 100-year strategy of building a pipeline through the Arctic Circle to hit
Hmm.
Europe, China, and other countries? I mean, that could be something that could secure our wealth for years, generations to come.
Yeah.
But it requires a lot of foresight and thought and living past all of our lives,
Hmm.
100, 200 years from now kind of thing. So,
Yeah, and I feel like too they just got so much mess over the years. Like they're
yeah.
just promising all these things and like they're great promises, but I think for me it's like yeah, I want to vote in the federal and obviously provincial, especially being in BC.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lord help us.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I
What
think
I,
I
I
think
I've always wondered what is going on in BC. Like I
don't
think
ask, man.
it's
When no, we're not okay. Okay, we're not. It's beautiful.
uh,
I love it. It's my
it's a
home
beautiful
province.
province.
It's
It's a gorgeous
amazing.
province.
But
Yeah.
we are in such a dire need of change. And so,
Yeah.
in one of my last episodes, a couple episodes ago, I kind of delve more into like the BC elections and how it works in both kind of platforms. And interesting enough, Liberals have pulled themselves out of the race entirely and have backed the Conservatives here in BC.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, so they rebranded to BC United
Okay.
instead of the Liberals of BC. I can't remember their exact specific name, but if you actually go back in Parliament in BC, it's always been like NDP with or Liberal. Either one of them has been majority and then opposition. So there's never been a conservative type of riding that made any sort of difference within British Columbia. And when I look back and lived in Alberta, which is predominantly conservative, I see the difference of life. And we're one province away,
Mm,
understanding that obviously Alberta is the motherland of, oil and gas. So they're obviously going to producing, but forestry should have been and could have been very huge in British Columbia as well as,
mm,
let's think about the West Coast as well with fisheries and stuff. So it's not
right.
that BC doesn't have resources, like just different resources. I think it comes
Mm-hmm.
down to policy and management. And if you look at Canada and a whole, I kind of look as BC as the like Australia and UK of the world. When you look at how extreme some things are and the
Mm-hmm.
policies that last, they always seem to dial down to BC. And I'm not trying to throw shade, but I'm saying if the only governments in policy, like in Parliament, have always been NDP or Liberal, like maybe we can have a switch up of thoughts, right? I think what
Yeah,
it
of
is a
course.
bunch of Liberals and NDPs are done with how things are and now building the Conservatives here within BC, and we're seeing it now in the polls. In the last little weeks. Obviously, when this airs, it's actually going to air the day before the BC election. So
Oh,
I
nice.
guess it'll be very interesting to see what actually happens. But it seems like
Yeah.
conservatives are actually making some leadway in BC. And for me personally, I would just like to see what they can do. And
Mm-hmm.
then kind of leading into that, where I can't obviously talk about immigration in a sense that like my parents are from here, like back, sure, back in my, generations past, there's definitely, but I can't really obviously speak on that understanding of what that's like. But one thing I can speak about is addiction and drugs. And
Yes.
now that we're talking about BC, I think it's a great time to, as we talked about the like safe supply and the decriminalization in
Mm-hmm.
BC. And this is always a topic that is also very taboo and very difficult to navigate and talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason why I feel safe to, not safe to, but maybe more valid in speaking it is because I'm a recovered addict. Now,
Mm.
I am not a fentanyl, but we're talking like heavy prescription drugs, like Tylenol threes. Like I could pop two or three at a time and it would like barely scratch the surface.
Wow.
And I'd be like 18, 19 years old and I'd just be prescribed tons of Tylenol threes. So my
Wow.
compassion and understanding that starting a pharmaceutical can lead to so many drugs, but also being someone that works very hard on a daily basis not to fall into those addictive habits because they can spur from usually from pharmaceuticals not being able to get them and then leading into street drugs.
Yeah.
um so the decriminalization of BC, like of the drugs in BC, I think is something that we as Canadians need to pay attention to, because it's not just gonna it's Alberta's doing an amazing job and BC is not doing an amazing job. And I think we need to
Mm.
look at that. And it comes down to policy and support. I don't know if you're familiar. Are
Mm-hmm.
you familiar at all of what Alberta's doing right now with their drug
Oh,
programs?
no, I'm not. Not at
So,
all, actually.
okay, so what's really cool, I'm not sure I say cool because that's a weird word to say when it comes to like drugs, but what they're doing is Alberta's having a focus on rehabilitation. And their
Mm,
focus is where I think where BC is trying to come from, where we don't want to stigmatize drug use in the sense that we don't want people to feel shame to get help, right? That is a
mm-hmm.
big part of recovery, is feeling comfortable to do so and having resources. The
Yeah.
problem with BC is I feel like they're just like decriminalizing and throwing money at things, and supporting safe supply and harm reduction, where Alberta's more leaning towards rehabilitation and having these
Mm,
individuals be able to then bring themselves back into society. And how can they
right.
learn skills and things that maybe they've lost for being on drugs, being on the streets, being in poverty, anything like that, and help them get back into the world and empowering them. And the focus is recovery, where the focus in BC is safety and not overdosing, which I don't know is leading
Mm,
to recovery more than it is
yeah.
leading to further addictions. That's so
Correct.
you're just watching the difference. And then I also heard that Ontario also is having safe supplies and has since like 2012.
Right.
This is not a new thing. I did not know
Right.
that.
Yeah. We've had safe injection. I think 12 safe injection sites.
Wow,
Yeah.
interesting. And so how do you know when that came in there? Has it been recent?
Yeah, so I think it came under the Liberal government in Ontario,
Okay.
and the Doug Ford Progressive Conservatives have, I believe, shut down a few of them. Um, Specifically, they're looking at crime statistics and success rates,
Mm,
quote unquote success rates, those getting off drugs as a result. So I think
mhm.
that's their rationale.
Yeah.
But I'd love to know more about like what you've seen work,
Yeah.
because clearly you're in a much better place.
Yeah.
I'd love to know from you what you see kind of works in for from a policy perspective for the individual.
Well, I think the idea of decriminalization and not like arresting people for that and putting them in jail and
Mm,
just throwing them to rot, I don't think that is the answer. So I understand
right.
the decriminalization, and I understand like safe supply in a sense that you want to help people get away from those drugs that are on the street into maybe a pharmaceutical. Then you can lower their dosage and help them come down from a drug like that. I understand that as a treatment as well, because as someone
Hmm.
who's also been on anxiety medication that just stopped them, and that's just a light SSRI, right? Like that wasn't heavy meth or fentanyl, and my brain felt like it was on a whole other dimension. It was getting brain
Hmm.
zaps. I thought I melted part of my brain, like. So I understand providing support and removing the decriminalization. The thing now is though is like at first when they launched it, it was like public drug use. So you could go
Right.
and do crack in parking or in parks with children, and
Wow.
police couldn't do anything. So I think what happened is I think it all started in the right sense. Like I said, we want to get the stigma away. We want people to feel safe. But where there's provided tools and accessibility with also having boundaries of safety of the people of the public and for those
Yeah.
people, I think allowing people to do a mass amount of drugs and just kind of giving them the green light without any sort of boundaries is
Yeah.
just going to promote more use, right? So
Hmm.
to me, you can put boundaries in as well as respecting the individual and the addiction and the mental health crisis that they're going in. So I
Yeah.
think addressing what the person's, just like everything else, let's address the root cause. Why is that person feel the need to use? Did you know what I mean? Like what is it, what's stopping them from healing, instead of just being like, here's some crack pipes, we're not going to put you in jail, just do it in the comfort of your own home.
Right.
Most like overdoses happen in the privacy of people's homes when there's nobody around. So I
Yeah.
also understand the need for sites if people are going to do it. I just think that, like you said, it's gone too extreme. It's like, let's have compassion,
Yeah.
but when does compassion, like we talked about in the last episode with maids, where's the
Hmm.
fucking line, right? We can
Yeah.
have compassion, but we also have to put boundaries, because is it compassionate to just be like, keep doing these drugs? We're not going to help you figure out why you're doing it.
Yeah.
You figure that out. Here's a phone number.
Hmm.
It's on you. Where it's just like Alberta's a little bit more progressive in like not making them go, but like very much putting them in a space that they're empowered to go, that they want to, because they're going to get somewhere. In
Hmm.
BC, where they're getting to. So one big thing, and I urge everyone to go watch Canada is Dying by Aaron Gunn. It was a year ago. It's got 1.4 million views right now. It's obviously demonetized on YouTube, which is bullshit. He should have got monetization for that because it is insane when you listen to it. So essentially what's happening in British Columbia, from what I gathered from the documentary, was people are getting prescriptions for safe supply for something called Dilaudid. I don't, that's just like the brand name. I don't remember the scientific name. I'm terrible at saying those words, but it's Dilaudid, and it's like called dillies on the street. So basically what's happening is that they're getting their safe supply, which sometimes can be 2 to 3 times higher than whatever they're taking on the street, like fentanyl.
Mm.
So what's interesting is that the BC government is going at Purdue Pharma for the opioid crisis in the
Mm.
same time that they are prescribing Dilaudid that is supposed to be 2 to 3 times more addicting than opioids. So they're
Wow.
suing them for doing this. And then who do you think
Mm.
makes a form of Dilaudid? Purdue Purdue Pharma.
Right, right. Wow.
So
That is
here's one of
interesting.
those things that I find super interesting that if people don't dive into, they're saying, fuck yeah, BC is going over the opioid crisis. They're trying to help by doing safe supply, which
Hmm.
I am not saying two truths can exist at the same time, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
can be helping people and it could be fucking people at the same time, right? So just because one exists doesn't mean we discredit the other. So
Hmm.
going to say that I understand that safe supply can help some people, but from what I'm hearing from pharmacists in like the Vancouver area is that they get uh like prescribed like, let's say, 40 tablets of Dilaudid. They take a couple and then they sell the rest on the street because it'll be cheaper than buying, let's say, fentanyl. So they'll take a bunch more of this Dilaudid, and depending on what drugs you are, it could. So it's just really actually, and they said they're increasing because now people can just go there and get the safe supply, and they get safer than doing something like fentanyl, but it's more addicting. So you're just going back, and it's actually creating more drug addicts than it is helping, is what I'm hearing from from these stories and from pharmacists that are like, and they're not hiding it. They'll
Hmm.
get their prescription, they'll walk right out front, they'll take the money, they'll sell it, they'll walk away because there's no laws against that. At least
Yeah.
to the perspective of everybody in BC, I guess it's, well, then people are getting safe supply. It's like, but you're getting them
Wow.
addicted to another pharmaceutical. Is that really the answer? Like,
Right.
tell me the difference between opioid and the safe supply. I thought it's to help get them off of it, not just, well, it's better than them. It's better that you're getting the money instead of people on the streets, because that's what I'm hearing. That's what I hear.
100%. I mean, what is the number one anti-anxiety medication in the US? I think it's Ativan.
That makes
And
sense.
yeah, and Ativan's like a methamphetamine.
Mhm.
Um, so to me, it's money. Like there's a lot of money at stake here. I think
Mhm.
that I think that a policy mix approach is needed.
Mhm.
It's there's no silver bullet. Thomas Sowell would always say
Yeah,
there's no solutions, only trade-offs, and I truly do believe that.
100%.
Um, so I think like you're right. There needs to be a compassionate approach
Mhm.
um, to how we treat those with drug addictions.
Mhm.
We also have to remember too that um, recovery is a real thing and can be done even with the most hardened drug user. I talked to Julian Summers, a researcher in this field, and one thing I think, and someone will probably call me out for this, but
Mhm.
I remember him saying that even someone with a 40-year cocaine addiction, their brain heals over
Mhm.
time
Totally.
when they get clean, and it just goes back to like normal functioning, which is really interesting when you think about it. But it's breaking that cycle, which is really important,
Mhm.
and then the supports that are needed for the individual. So it's not enough to have a safe injection site,
Yep. Agree.
because there's not enough evidence to show that reduced drug dependency happens as a result of a
Mhm.
safe injection site. And so I think that, yeah, it's tough. It it's often portrayed as the silver bullet answer. If only we
Mhm.
provide people a safe injection site, they would suddenly stop or reduce their use of drugs. And there's no evidence for that last part. And I think that's where a lot of quote unquote regular Canadians are like, hang on, this is an extreme policy. we thought this would lead to reduced drug use.
Yep.
There's no evidence for that piece.
Hmm.
Why then are we doing SIS?
Yes.
And I think that's where a lot of Canadians are kind of lost in
Hmm.
thinking like this is an extreme innovative policy, which is interesting,
Hmm.
but there's no evidence to show that this helps the individual.
Yep.
Um, and then of course there's also like not everyone's going to a safe injection site. Like you said,
No.
people do it in their personal homes. And so
Hmm.
like how are we reaching people who are in true need of help, right? So
Yes.
it's a policy mixed approach. It can't be one or the other, I think.
No, no. And I don't know that anybody knows the right answer either. But I think what I
Yeah.
would love to see is honesty to things not working, you know? So
Yeah.
they released this and, we're on a 3-year decriminalization exception from Health Canada and BC right now. It was started January 31st, 2023. So we have 3 years of this like pilot program to see how it's going to go. Okay,
Right.
cool. A pilot program means to me that you're testing this and I appreciate that you're trying. Like,
Mm-hmm.
thank you for trying. And I understand not everyone can get it right. So I have grace in that understanding. But when you see that nothing has changed, things have been worse. I understand we want to eliminate overdose, right? So
Mm-hmm.
having safe injection sites, I'm sure maybe there was a decrease in overdose. But then when you're pumping it with safe supply, when people are
Yeah.
going overboard because they think it's safe and they hear that word, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's people that wouldn't even do that or doing that because they can get it from a doctor. And here's the thing, I believe that those medications can work under the care of a
Of
physician or a
course.
mental health practitioner. But if
Of
you're
course.
just cutting a prescription, how are you any better than the fucking pharma doctors down in the States that just write
Exactly.
prescriptions and just funnel the opioid crisis down there? To me, I'm sorry, you're not better. And I'm not saying that to the pharmacists and the doctors. I'm just saying, like, why aren't we looking into this more? And people are afraid, again, to talk about it, even
Mm-hmm.
in those places, because we have things like Bill 36 that prevents healthcare practitioners in British Columbia from wrong think and wrong speak, and they can get fined
What?
and go to prison. Yeah, this passed during the pandemic, Bill
What?
36. Yeah, so health practitioners in British Columbia, if they wrong think or wrong speak, they can get a fine anywhere from 200,000 to a million and go to jail from anywhere for a couple months to 6 months to whatever they decide. Um, so
That
when
is
the
wild.
Yeah, man, told you, policies, you gotta look, like, we gotta look into them. People just don't pay attention. Like, this has already happened, it's passed, it's done, it's not up for question. um so when you have situations like this, how are pharmacists supposed to speak out and say, hey, your safe supply isn't actually even going into the prescribed person, it's getting sold onto the streets? But I guess we don't matter because allegedly pharmacies are incentivizing patients to come to their pharmacies to get their prescriptions, because giving them some money and some incentivization to get their prescriptions filled that brings in thousands and thousands of dollars a year, that's not very much money, right? And this is happening, at all levels here, especially in Vancouver, where we can see that there's obviously things aren't working. And to the next point, where there's nurses that are being told to put on masks if someone's smoking
Mm.
crack in the hospitals because we need to
Mm.
respect their spaces. And it's just like, I'm sorry, women are being told not to breastfeed, their nurses are being told not to breastfeed their babies because they might have inhaled toxic chemicals from the crack smoke in
Wow.
hospitals.
This is
What
wild.
the
What
fuck?
this is exactly where I think we've allowed more activists in
Yes.
positions inside government, inside big pharma, inside hospital boards, etc. There are policies that hospital boards are pursuing that have great influence in our ministers of health, our chief medical health officers, much more activist than evidence based. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the real danger to our society, because activists have a very important role from a civil society perspective. We need
100%.
activists in our civil society. Even if we vehemently disagree with them, activists play a
Yes.
very vital role to, just show us our blind spots. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, activism can actually turn into more informed policy, which I think
Agreed.
moderate people are like, oh, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we can't have activists in positions of power because there's too much responsibility that position holds. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can't have the minister of health, you know, talk about um, talk about in disparaging terms people who disagree with the government or the policy that they're putting out. Because what I find with ministers of health, specifically at the federal level, it's very ideologically driven,
Yes.
not evidence-based driven. And what you've just mentioned is, it sounds like the hospital boards, the Minister of Health in BC, etc., are driven by ideology.
Mm.
And also they're doing this like under a cloak like of mystery, because like you said earlier, it's buried in some legislation. Sure, it's posted online, regular, every average everyday British Columbians don't have the time to, you know, go through all of that PDF document.
And it's always
um
redacted somewhere.
right, so you're at this loss. You go to the hospital and you see a nurse with a mask, and you're like, why are you wearing a mask? And it's like, this is wild.
Yes,
How
and
did
it's
we
actually
get here?
happening. It's actually happening, right? And what I find kind of crazy, and again, I'm not like trying to shit on NDP, but unfortunately, that's just who's been running the province that I live in for the last 8 years.
Yeah.
Kind of like our country. And I just like, unfortunately, I can't compare what conservatives would do to what they've done and what they've said, right? I have
Hmm.
to kind of just rely
Yes.
on what they're saying. But I can look at NDP and the Liberals and go, this is what you said, and this is what you're doing. So on their
Yeah.
platform, it's like bringing all these people in and putting in policies so that we have healthcare. Bruh, emergency places are shutting down everywhere. We have nurses
Hmm.
that didn't get to work until up and recently, and still there is some regulation about the like mandates that are still a little fucked. Like we
Hmm.
just stopped asking again. I still have to dive into it, but they the thing is that the mandates happened. It wasn't just unvaccinated nurses that weren't able to come back. It was any nurse that didn't want to disclose their vaccine status. And that's
Wow.
super important. We brought that up in an episode, is that we want people to also be aware it wasn't just unvaccinated. Some of these nurses were vaccinated but didn't want to take the leap in, like
Disclose.
you
Yeah.
were stepping over what you should
Hmm.
be, right? And so like you said, there is people in these positions, especially in BC, that go on the popular vote, the woke, like not woke ideology. I don't want to say that, but the more progressive, to the point where there's, let's have progression with facts behind it. That's the world
Hmm.
that I want to live in. I want to progress, but I want to see the facts. And like I said, if people were being honest with this drug thing, if we launched this in 2023 and we seen an immediate like, holy fuck, this isn't working. Instead, EB was like, okay, let's just dial back public spaces, but you can still
Hmm.
use at home, and you can still have under 2.5 grams of meth and cocaine. And so cops go up to a situation and they're like, well, I mean, they could have, it looks like they just have 2 point, like, it's just such a fucked up thing, but they don't want to talk about that. They just want to
No.
keep going because the idea of it sounds so nice, because the empathy and compassion, and we want to be,
Yeah.
but to me, encouraging more drug use as a recovered addict, to me, is not helping. My doctor at 16 shouldn't have been like, here's some Tylenol 3 for your pain, for your
Yeah.
period. It should have been like, what is the root cause of why your period is making you this
Right.
sick? And at 37, I am just finally in front of a naturopath who's like, okay, what's going on? No, we're
Yeah.
not going to be taking. So for me, in my experience, support of the right things and getting to the root cause is always going to be the right way to go. And unfortunately, in Western society, it's throw whatever is easiest at the problem. And you gave them tools, so you did something. So this is where we're
Yeah.
not helping people. We're throwing them safe supply with no guidance, no community, no help to get back into society. It's like, okay, well, they're just going to go get high and go back on the street. And then what? So, what are we doing
Yeah.
with them? How are we helping them? How are we supporting them? How are we getting to the root cause of why they became an addict in the first place? Because if
Hmm.
you can get to that, then we can have proper care. Were you abused as a child? Were you abused in an adult relationship? Were you, I'm not sure, medically disabled some way? Is it an actual mental illness, or is it an environmental illness? Are you supporting your body properly? Is it a financial thing? Like,
Hmm.
there's so many ways that people become drug addicts. To just throw more drugs at them with no support. I mean, look at BC. Like, I'm afraid to
Yeah.
go out downtown by myself now. That is not something I've experienced in my life.
Wow. And
And
that's
now
scary
I'm afraid.
because, yeah, and that's so wild because, the uh, Canada on a global scale has a lower crime rate, but yet there's that fear. And some even say there was an Instagram post of someone walking through Brooklyn and being like, this is a rough area, da, 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 da. And someone commented saying like, yeah, check out the downtown east side.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably worse.
Yep. And what's
And
crazy,
nobody
sorry,
talks about
just
that.
Yeah, just to dive quickly for a second, talking about this. So I grew up on Vancouver Island, and me and my girlfriends, obviously not big girls, we're tiny little girlies, and we'd always go to Vancouver to concerts, right? So we just take the ferry over, and it was so much fun. And
Yeah.
one time, we were doing drugs. We probably shouldn't have. We got on the bus and we went to the east, like went through like the east side,
Mm,
and we stopped in places that we shouldn't have stopped, and it was terrifying.
mm,
10 No, this was like 20 years ago. I can't imagine what it was like now. So it's like, to me, this
mm.
problem has been a problem here forever, and it blows my mind that we just think throwing money and like again, I don't think they should go to jail for this. They do need proper treatment though, and it can't
Yeah.
just be throw drugs at it. So it just blows my mind to where it was 20 years ago. I couldn't imagine. Like, I remember being like, "Oh, I'm fine." Like, I used to be able to walk downtown Vancouver and it was
Yeah.
scary, but nothing happened to me. I would not fucking do that now. I would not go to East
Mm,
Hastings now. I would not, like, again, we were 19 and we were like, this is scary, but nothing actually happened to us. I just don't think that would happen now. And so I think,
mhm.
yeah, it's like watching that decline is showing that whatever policies and support that we're giving through these is just not working. It's just getting worse. So
Mhm.
why are we doubling down? Why aren't we? And so that's why I really hope that Danielle Smith and the Alberta government is really, really piloting a really beautiful program of hope and recovery and community. And no, we don't want to you. We want to put you in a path to be healthier and be better. What has it been like in your guys' area? Like, have you seen a massive? I've just never been really. I've been to Toronto once and St. Catharines once, so I don't really know that side. Is it
Yeah.
always like, is it
Yeah.
drug like infused too, or how are you guys there?
That's a good question. I would say that there definitely are. I noticed in COVID there are a lot more visible drug users downtown Toronto. I'm certain there are in many parts of downtown Toronto as well. I think that there's a real concern in Toronto, and I'm sure it's the very similar in BC with people. And I chatted just last night with my cousin about this, but people who are more again like on the surface, they're like, yeah, of course this is a good idea, but just not in my neighborhood. Just not next
Yeah,
to my kid's school, just not
yeah.
next to my house. Like,
Then
and these are
where?
people who live downtown. Exactly. Then where, right? And so I think that is the real issue because I really think there's an opportunity for governments to invest more in psychological. We
Mhm.
always say mental health, but it's
I
really
know.
like psychological interventions. And I think you've
Yeah.
you've mentioned this earlier that the psychological intervention can really make a big difference because if it's sustained over a long period of time, there is changed behavior that lasts the rest of people's lifetimes. And that is seen not just in drug use, but in so many other areas. I did a whole series on medical assistance in dying, and
Mm,
this researcher made this such a fascinating point about how she worked with spinal cord injury,
mm,
people who were quadriplegics after a tragic accident. Um, Within a week, sorry, as soon as as soon as they realized they would be a quadriplegic for the rest of their life, suicide rates or suicidal ideation was
mm,
like 90% amongst this focus group. And it just kept being sustained like, there's no point. I live my life to the best and I can't live like this. And through consistent and persistent psychological intervention over 18 to 24 months, going to focus groups, going to, support groups, etc., there was no more suicidal ideation. People were like, yeah, this is now my life. I've
mhm,
adapted.
mhm,
I'm okay. My family and my friends support me. It's actually totally fine.
mhm,
I'm no longer like, depressed or uh, I thinking about suicide.
yeah,
And I think the same can be true for those with very strong and deep drug addictions. I do
agreed.
think there is something to be said about a a psychological intervention to the individual at the individual level to understand the impact not only to themselves but to their community, to their family, but also that there's a real power in social reintegration. And so
Mhm,
there are studies who've been where people who are addicts but want to get back to a quote unquote normal life, if you take them out of East Hastings, of downtown um, areas, and you put them in more upper middle class, upper class areas, because everyone in that area and community is always like working and they're all busy, they're going to the coffee shop and then they're like gone to work for 12-hour days, it actually changes an individual deeply to say, wow, like I can't just hang out. I have to go out and do something
mhm,
because I'm surrounded by people who are just moving fast to where they're going, I can't, I'm not surrounded by people who are, not doing that.
Yeah.
It's a strange thing, but like
Yeah. And your
our
environment for sure.
your environment does impact how you carry
Totally.
yourself.
Yes.
So there's something to be said about the psychological intervention that I think could actually help on a large scale, but it does take sustained and a long period of time. But perhaps that's something governments can invest in more.
Totally. And I think there's all those two pieces too. Again, coming back to that, finding out the root cause of why that person is addicted. Like,
Hmm.
because it really, like, if you're going to go at someone that and try to heal their mental illness, let's
Yeah.
just say, but they have trauma from being abused, but you think they're
Right.
just depressed and you're just treating depression, but their body is storing that abuse.
Hmm.
Just going to like mental therapy, like talk therapy, might not be enough because their
Yeah.
body's storing that. So what are we doing to
Right.
restore the body and the nervous system? Like healing is so many different ways of doing it. That's why I think it's important to have these community centers, and that's why I really love what Alberta's doing, because they're saying what
Hmm.
they want to encourage healing and surround people with other people that are healing, so that shame and guilt kind of dissolves a little bit because you're around other people doing it. And how are they handling it with family, and what did they do, and a
Yeah.
space where we can talk about it, and a full tiered um care program where it's like, what's the mental health aspect? Oh, how did you get here? Like, do you struggle with your finances? Like, some people actually do have money or can, but they just don't know how to manage their finances, and they
Hmm.
spend too much on drugs, and they're just like one paycheck away from getting better, but maybe they don't know how to manage their money, and so then they use more because they're stressed about, you know what I mean? So if
Yeah.
we can have like people help categorize the root cause of why someone became a drug addict, then maybe we can treat them properly and then support that instead of just
Hmm.
giving them drugs. Put them in a facility that they can be supported through that and watch through that, and then decrease, not just here's pills, you're watching them go sell them. Like, I just don't think that's
Yeah.
the approach, and that's fine that you guys made a mistake. Thank you for trying to do something about this crisis, but if you're not continually aggressively reevaluating and being able to be like, this wasn't it, let's walk back on this. But it seems like, especially right now, because we're going into an election in October, it seems like again, it's more about how we look more than what's actually happening, because most British Columbians, like you said, like we said, aren't looking into deeper than these, like, oh, on my NDP website, it's saying that I'm doing all these things. Like, I'm bringing in
Yeah.
more nurses and doctors. But if you look deeper, they also locked in Bill 36, silencing most people. And then they had the mandates. And so it's like, what's fact versus this fluff of bullshit that you're saying to me? And we just don't have time to do that. So I think what I encourage people to do is like, remove the gaslighting. What do you feel? How is housing? Do you feel like housing is good? Do you feel like the drug
Hmm.
problem and homeless problem, is being supported properly? Do you feel like the climate's changed with all this carbon tax? Because, like, I mean, I guess Kelowna didn't have fires this summer, so I guess the money's working. Like, is that what the play is? Is that what they're gonna come out now and be like,
Oh
look at
my
all this
God.
carbon tax. We didn't have big fires in BC this year. And then I'm like, yeah, because you control the weather, you fucks. Just kidding.
Yes,
Not kidding,
this
kidding.
no, this carbon tax. My goodness,
and
Jesus.
and to that, like, okay, so you know now, because it's BC elections, EB's like, oh well, if the federal backs off carbon tax, like, we'll back off carbon tax. It's like, how about you just push forward and say British Columbians pay enough taxes,
Yeah.
please? Like, oh, if Trudeau says, like, I need a fucking premier that's not going to just be because Trudeau says, like, I don't know, I just
Yeah.
have mad respect for Danielle Smith. Like, it's been very hard for us being in BC, having lived in Alberta for 10 years under a conservative government, because it's like we're over in BC, like, help, help. Do you guys have a provincial election coming up anytime soon? What's your guys's
Yeah,
space like?
we have an election. Well, it's not clear whether or not when the election's going to happen. The four governments kind of indicated it very well might happen sooner rather than later. But, similar to other provinces, I think surprisingly, uh, I find conservatives are more likely, more of the time, not all of the time, but more of the time, to strike a more moderate balance in policy than liberals. And I mean, the NDP, of course, they'll always fight for the most extreme on the left, but the liberals seem to be more and more NDP, like stealing their base. That's why I'm a bit confused with Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau, because
Yeah.
Justin Trudeau did everything that the NDP wanted in a prime minister in many respects. I mean,
Yeah.
he didn't do everything, obviously, but
No.
like Justin Trudeau, in my opinion, and I'm not trying to be like, political, but Justin
Please.
Trudeau is the closest the NDP may ever get to the PMO. Like,
Yeah.
I just that I mean, like, I just
It's
that
like
to
his little
me,
brother. Like, okay, we'll have to
right?
bring you because
Like you can't, like, Paul Martin wouldn't have done it, Jean
N-
Chrétien wouldn't have done
no.
those types of policies. Like they were much more moderate. I would even argue maybe even right of center, because
Yes.
Paul Martin cut a lot of government spending. But Justin Trudeau was in fact the NDP prime minister. I mean, he really was. And so it's so odd. Maybe Jagmeet Singh is upset that Trudeau has basically stolen his base from him. I don't
Yeah.
know. Like I just
Yeah,
I
tired of him
can't.
being the face with his ideas. Like he's
Yeah,
just like
like
erasing his name on his schoolwork and putting his name in and submitting it.
exactly. Like I just, so here's a perfect example. I don't know if you saw the video of the steel worker in Ontario that called out Trudeau for you
So
saw that,
good.
right?
Yes, it
They're
was
so
so
good.
good.
And he was just reaming things off, and I
Yep.
loved it. He's like,
Yep.
well, I pay dental care more because I'm not low income, so I don't get
Hmm.
the dental care benefit, etc. And then one thing he said, Justin Trudeau's like, we're 400 million in this and da da da. It's like, how does that relate to the steel worker, right? If I were
Hmm.
Trudeau, I'd be like, don't talk about your big policy, that doesn't affect this guy.
Yep.
But one thing that the one thing Trudeau said to him when he was saying, hey, like, oh, your programs benefit my neighbor who doesn't work and she's lazy and da da da, and she's making more money than me, and I'm busting my ass here at this steel mill.
100%.
And Trudeau was like, in Canada, we like to take care of each other, da da da. And I'm like, what? That is the
No, we
worst
don't.
answer
No,
to
we don't.
give that person. Like, you have to make that person feel like they matter,
Yep. Yep.
and this is the result of us electing more ideologically driven leaders.
Yep.
Like, say, listen to, if I were Trudeau, I would have been like, you know what, you're right, our policies haven't been hitting those in the middle class that are working really hard. What would you suggest? How can I kind of take back what
Hmm.
you're saying
Hmm.
so that we can do some work internally to
Hmm.
make sure that they're relevant for you?
Yep.
But instead he just doubled down and said, it's for, I don't know, it was too ideological, and that's
Yes.
exactly what is wrong, I think, with our politics. We're not listening to each other anymore.
No, and that's I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that if we contrast that interaction with the one that Jagmeet just had recently with the one guy that said something to
Yeah.
him, and like I will say, like I have anger towards people too, but I also want to have real life discourse. So I think on both
Yeah.
sides we can look on how do we do this better. The way that construction worker did it, I feel like he came from a place like, yo, bro, this is what's actually affecting me, and these are the
Yes.
reasons why, and I'm going to actually use your policies against you, and it's a
Yeah.
actual real facts instead of just throwing insults, because insults to
Yeah.
me are the lowest form. They feel good. We can do them at home. We can do them over
Yes.
texting. But I think when it comes to discourse and we want that's ego speaking when all you can speak
Yeah.
is an insult. So I feel like he was not justified because you are a politician. You should have handled that better and been like,
Agreed.
why would you say that to me? Why do you feel that way? Say, like, what do you want to
Yes.
say to me? Like, what the fuck are you gonna do, bro? Are you actually gonna throw
Yeah.
down? No. So you had an
Yeah.
opportunity there that you could have said, why did you, and school him in a way that makes him look
Yes.
stupid because he maybe didn't have that, or you could have had a good discussion with someone that's maybe angry for right reasons,
For
and you
sure.
could have led that into adult discourse and show the country that you can handle all sorts of individual and reactions, which in a leadership role we want to see. So when this construction worker also did the same thing, Trudeau also missed the opportunity. Like you said, he didn't even have to say you're right. His
Hmm.
ego didn't even have to say that. He could have been like, thank you for sharing how you truly feel. Can you explain to me how you would feel that it would be better
Hmm.
handled? Not saying
Right.
he's right, not admitting he's done anything wrong, but taking
Yeah.
the feedback in a way that's not admitting, that can't be chopped up. Like, y'all, we're in a social media viral TikTok world. You need to be
Yeah.
very aware of what you're saying and how it can be chopped up out of context, especially in politics. So when you're
Hmm.
saying shit like that or reacting like these people are, we're missing opportunities to get to actual solutions. So please, when we're doing this, everybody, myself included, need to
Of
take
course.
some ego out. And like you said, instead of looking at just the next 4 years and the next get me into office, what are you fucking doing for my kids and my kids' kids? Sorry, my cats and my cat's cats. And,
Yeah.
like, or my
Yeah.
friends' kids, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I'm going to be an old age person, and I'm looking at people that have to go back to work in their 60s, 70s to be able to support themselves because they can't afford shit in their
Yeah.
retirement. Why aren't we talking about those types of things? But like instead,
Yeah.
politics has turned into, and like, again, I get annoyed with peer, like, stop bitching like you're in this drama. It's actual
Mhm.
Canadian lives that we have at stake here. Stop fucking making this about, oh, blah 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 said this and he did this, and like, I don't even care about the blackface shit anymore. What are we doing to fix our country, please? Like, like, I'm even tired of the Trudeau shit. Like,
Yeah.
what are we actually doing, you guys? Can we actually
Yeah.
talk about this? Canadians are dying. They're one paycheck away from living on the streets. How did we get here? And I'm going to say, we
Yeah.
said that this was going to happen at the beginning of the pandemic if we went this
We did.
crazy with lockdowns and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And I hate to say that some people were right about this, but like, what else could it be?
100%. 100%. And I think there's a lot of policy too that people are less aware of that are very, again, ideologically driven, that we're spending money on every year, and there's
Mm.
other healthcare things that we should be spending on and we're not, right? Like things that could really benefit you. So to your point about, someone working in their 60s and 70s, now imagine if eye care and hearing and dental care, not just for low-income families, but for every Canadian, was taken care of by our public healthcare system. I believe that's possible in our public healthcare system, that it
Yes.
can be taken care of.
Yes.
Um, what about physio?
Mhm.
Like physio for knees, chiro for your back. I mean, those things can be taken care of by our healthcare system. They're not out of reach given the amount of taxes we all pay into. Seeing a therapist, it's not for everyone, but something along those lines can
Anything.
be for every Canadian.
Mhm.
That to me could be the biggest impact, and perhaps something that maybe I'll write my local MP as something
Yeah.
the government should consider in their spending. Like,
Mhm.
if a lot of people would say, oh well, therapy's not the magic bullet. Okay, I understand, but some type of support, just to say,
Yes.
hey, this is tax deductible, or
Mhm.
we'll help to a certain, like, we'll copay to a certain level. The government can do that for 40 million people. It can do that because the amount of taxes we generate is wild, and it's just gone up dramatically since COVID, and nobody wants to talk about that either. Tax revenue has gone up dramatically since 2020.
Oh
And
goodness.
I think there's something to be said about that, and COVID, but that's a separate
Very
conversation.
sus. Very sus.
It's totally sus. But those are the things where I'm like, that is okay. So the government may not be able to fully address housing. They may not be fully able to address, you know, day-to-day costs immediately. But what
Totally.
they could do immediately is be like, these are things inside our healthcare system that could help just a little bit.
Yep.
And it's not just for low-income families. It should be for everyone. Like, it
Yes.
shouldn't be everyone suffering. It's not just, I mean, of course, if you're on a fixed income, you're suffering a lot with the
Mhm.
current economy. But
Mhm.
middle class people are right at the edge of that, the precipice. And the steel worker that was confronting Trudeau just showcased to Trudeau, hey, by the way, in 2015, you said you were standing up for the middle class and all those who want to join it. That was his famous line.
Mhm.
And, like, 9 years later, here's someone in the middle class who's like, what have you done
You
for me?
fucked me. You
Yeah.
fucked me, you liar.
Yeah.
and
Right. And so I don't know.
that's why I think, yeah, like to your point, it's important to go back. And again, I know it's hard. It's hard to look right now. But what if you are going to elect the same people in? Please go
Yeah.
back if they have a history and look at what they've said. You can actually check these people.
Yeah.
It's hard, I know, to put faith into something that you don't know on hopes and dreams and prayers. But I mean,
Hmm.
government's not crumbling as much as I know a lot of people just want it to, and what a utopia that would be. That, that's how
Yeah.
cults start also, like,
Of
but
course.
like, we've got to have some sort of like we've talked about before, some sort of like organization within the chaos of the world too, right? We need people to be
Hmm.
responsible. We need boundaries. I don't think law enforcement and I don't think rules are bad. Like, I think we
No.
need boundaries, and I think we do need to compassionately enforce them. And there's always going to be
Hmm.
bad eggs. So back to your point of like, okay, maybe therapy isn't what needs to be offered for someone to heal whatever they're going through, but then
Hmm.
why can't we give gyms a tax break and
Yeah.
allow for that? Why can't we give nutritionalists a tax break
Yeah.
if you go to a nutritionist, and or put them them a part of our fucking health benefits. Like
Yeah.
I'm working with a naturopath right now in BC, but because she's not under like the BC health, I have to go through my naturopathic benefits, which I only have $500 for,
Yeah.
which, doesn't go very far. And the supplements that I
Mhm.
have to take that I want to take that aren't pharmaceuticals, I have to
Mhm.
pay out of pocket for. How is that fair? So expanding those types of things and supporting Canadians and the resources that we already are supposed to have that have a little bit too
Mhm.
much regulation on it, right? And even to that point, like they're regulating healthcare products and making them have to be treated like, Western pharmaceuticals that have these big, I think there needs to be accountability, but we also don't need to be attacking them like the people that are creating addictions and drug dependencies, like so they're doing all these little things that are really taking
Yeah.
independence and power away from people. And I think some people love it. I'm sorry. I think
Yeah.
some people love to listen to everything somebody else says because
Of
then they
course.
have no personal accountability, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen
Yeah.
that during the pandemic. I'm just listening to the government. I was just listening to what the
Yeah.
health officials said. And it's
Yeah.
like, but they were wrong on a
The other
lot of
side. Yeah.
things. So you didn't have to necessarily agree with the people going against, but you didn't have to
Mhm.
condemn them and didn't have to
Oh
act
my
like they were
gosh, yeah.
stupid, right? Like
100%. I mean, there's all types of research about, I mean, this is very extreme, but there are all types of research to say, what happened in the 1930s in Germany wasn't some random guy coming to power. It was a lot of people discharging their responsibility
Mm,
to the government saying, I don't know what's going on. They've got it under control.
yeah.
Instead of holding their government to account to say, hang on, what? Like, I don't agree with that.
Mhm,
And when we discharge our responsibility to government, we get things like COVID, we
mhm,
get things like lockdowns, we get things like mandatory vaccines, we get
mhm,
things like, here's some policy ideas I've always had, and I'm going to keep hammering them home. Why do we ask for gender and sexual orientation identification in job ads? Like, it makes no sense to me. eGale Canada has written extensively about how the LGBTQ community also feel like this targets them, because if you say you're trans on a job ad, are you being hired because they didn't hit their LGBTQ quota? Like,
yep, yep,
what
yep,
really makes a difference for many sexual minorities is policies in the workplace to prevent discrimination and harassment. But
yep.
to openly say that on a job ad is wild to me. That is perhaps the most personal information you could ever share with someone. Like, hey, by the
Yeah.
way, this is who I'm sleeping with, and
No
this is their
doubt.
gender.
You
Like,
want my
what?
like whole profile and who I've slept
Yeah,
with too, just to be safe? Like,
right.
how does that,
That
like I think too, it also on both sides, like it could are like also hurt someone by being hired for the wrong reasons for multiple
correct.
different reasons, but it could also
Yeah,
prevent a really good person from being
candidate.
hired, maybe just from one HR person that
Yeah,
person could very well suit that position, but maybe they do have a bias to a trans person or a gay person
right.
or a person of color. That's, like not that that's a thing, but like
Of course.
we do know that there are people that have biases and that sucks. But then now it's like the Streisand effect. It's like you're
Yeah,
trying to make it seem like, not look at it, don't look at it, it doesn't matter. But by highlighting it, you're actually making it worse for several reasons, where it's like
for
the
several reasons.
interview and the application without that piece, like your
Hmm.
education, your experience towards that should be, and your personality should be, to me, what you're being hired on. And I mean, we can go right to your shirt in that same sense, right?
Yes.
Because that is something that is very huge in
Yes.
Canada and the States.
Yeah. Sleeper diversity hire, folks. That's
That
the
is
shirt, and
so
I'm sticking
funny.
to it.
That
I'm
is
trying to
so
get it made in an ethical way.
I know.
Brandy, you're gonna help me out.
Yes, we're gonna do it. Yes, we're gonna have merch. 2025, both podcasts are coming out with merch. That's the goal for
Yes,
next year. But it's
100%.
and it's not like I don't disagree that there are people that are biased and racist and
Yeah,
homophobic and transphobic, because those things do exist. But I think the problem now is because everything's labeled the minute you're like, hey, all I'm saying is that I want a good pilot, and I don't really care who that pilot goes
I
home at
don't
night
care.
to. I don't
Yeah,
care where they came from, what their background is. I want to know that they pass the requirements to take me home safely, and that they will do what they feel is ethically right in a moment of danger. That
yeah,
is what I care about. I do not care about if,
yeah,
they like to wear skirts on the side.
yeah,
Like, not to be that way. And I think people that are against that
yeah,
also need to dial back. And we do need to understand that
yeah.
I like to say, like, let's devil's advocate both sides when you have a opinion, right? Like,
Hmm.
are all trans people pedophiles? No, stop trying to say that. Like, so I feel like on
Yeah,
that one side, there's an extreme saying that won't accept trans people, which I understand is a frustration and we need to work through, because they absolutely do deserve to have rights and freedoms. But the problem is that because now it's being bubbled and the conversation can't even happen. Again, like I said, when we don't have that, then inner
hmm,
animosity just brings, and then we're just throwing insults and we're not having real conversation, and then more divide happen, right? Like,
of
we can
course.
say that trans exists, and we can also say like trans kids, that's a whole other nuanced conversation
Oh
that we
yeah.
need to be very careful in. And
Hmm.
but trans adults, like, okay, let's just, they're adults, and if we want to believe in doing your own thing, then we need to let that happen. That being said, if there's a bunch of money that's being funded for these individuals, but we have diabetics that are going into diabetic shocks and not being able to have their medication or paying tons for that, I think that deserves a conversation, right?
Of
Like, of where the
course.
money's being
Of
spent. But of course, if
course.
I say that, I'm transphobic, and it's like,
I'm
no.
Yeah. At this point, I'm okay being transphobic. I
Yeah, if
mean,
that's
at
what it
that point,
means.
like
Yeah.
if I'm asking questions that calls out those really nuanced conversations, and someone labels me that, to me, I hate to say that they're mentally ill, but they're not. They're very ideologically driven, and they
Mhm.
can't. What I've found, and I posted this on Twitter or X, one
You
thing
are
that I
brave.
found is those that are most progressive are not in favor of open and honest conversation, which is
Yeah.
so odd to me. Like, it is so odd. Like, isn't how you got here through open and honest conversation, and now you can't have an open and honest conversation? Like,
We want no
we can't,
boundaries. No
no
boundaries.
boundaries.
Not one.
Like, we can't talk about
They're offensive.
detransitioning, you can't talk
Yeah.
about, like, you know and so when I interviewed Ken Zucker, he would always say, that parents would bring kids to the gender clinic who were, you know dressing as a girl and they were a
Mm.
boy, and the parents were so concerned. They're like, oh, this kid, he's definitely transitioning. And the doctors would say, no, he's being a kid, and kids do
Yeah.
dumb stuff sometimes, and that's okay. Like, let
Yeah.
them, they're testing the boundaries both of the parents, of their society, of their environment. They don't know. They're just, they're, like a toddler. They're bumping around things. They're trying to understand. They're very observant.
Mhm.
People don't realize like how observant kids are. And so they're trying to see like, oh, like if I put on this like dress, or if I play with
Yeah.
Barbies, will mommy and daddy yell at me? Let's test that out. But if it's sustained over a longer period of time, then yes, there's a real cause
Of course.
that this could be gender dysphoria. And also,
Totally.
I notice people don't want to say diagnosed with gender dysphoria. We need to say that because
It's a
it's a medical
diagnosable.
condition.
It is a
It's a
medical
medical
condition.
condition, and it's not
Yes.
like, we're not saying it's bad. It's
Mm-mm.
just parents have to know that this is a medical condition, and there's
Absolutely.
supports for those with
Mhm.
gender dysphoria. And
Yes.
we're one of the most accepting countries in the world for gender dysphoria. And also, people don't know this, but like in 2016, Ontario, and I'm sure it's the same in BC, we support transitioning surgeries, top and bottom surgeries. Those are covered by our public healthcare system. You know what's not covered by our public healthcare system? Eye care,
Everything.
vision, ear
Everything.
care, physio,
Like
chiro,
cancer
like
treatment.
cancer treatments. Like, there's so many things that are not covered,
Mhm.
and yet transitioning surgeries are covered, and you only need two doctors. That needs to be discussed. And
That needs to be
people will say
discussed.
like, it's a small percentage of the population that goes through this. I understand
Mm,
that, but it's like an ideological statement to say we support this but we don't support this. And
yes,
I think that needs to be openly discussed. The fact that it isn't is precisely how we're getting to this place where people really do hate the fact
that community.
that this is happening.
Well, too, because think about being that person that, and we know these people that have like heavy cancers that are being on wait lists to be able to die, like to treat something that's going to potentially kill them. But
Yes.
yet there's all this funding and support for people that do. And again, and to your point, like it is a mental illness diagnosis. And I find it interesting that it's like it's popular for some mental diagnoses and these are okay, but this one we can't say is a mental diagnosis. But like having anxiety and depression on TikTok,
Yeah.
or having like bipolar or neurodivergent, all these things is cool in some areas, but other places it's like, oh gosh, don't you dare say that that's a medical thing. And it's like, okay, we're not saying that they're bad people. They're
It's
not
not
saying
bad.
we need
It's
to
not
be
bad.
excommunicated.
Exactly.
We're saying that something is up and that there's certain treatment that to support to a diagnose if that's true,
Yeah.
because there's a bunch of other, like, all of us went through the phases. All of us, like you said, either as a kid, as we're dressing, as we're testing the bounds of what we even like. Maybe I tried GI Joe and I was like, you know what, this really isn't
Not
for
for
me.
me.
Maybe I
Yeah.
played with trucks and I didn't like it, or maybe I played with
Yeah,
Barbies and I wasn't surrounded
for
by other
sure.
girls, so that was weird, right? Maybe I'm a
Yeah.
boy that has 6 sisters and it's really fun to play Barbies right now because in my community, everybody in my house, we're all having fun. But then I get
Yeah.
out and I'm like, no, I'm not gay. Like, what do you mean? Like,
Right.
and
Right.
how, like, truly, in my opinion, I feel like some of this gender dysphoria, or like even just, sorry, I'm going to say trans push. If you have
Hmm.
gender dysphoria, that's one thing. The trans push, I think, is also a little bit like there is rooted homophobia in there, because it's like, why can't a boy just be gay or
Yeah.
feminine, or why can't like, my mom was very tomboy and she has, like, sorry mama, she
Right.
has melons and she would like tape her boobs down because she didn't want that
Mm.
sexual attention from boys. But that didn't
Mm.
mean that because that's because she wanted to be a boy. She just didn't want that attention at a very young age
Yeah.
because she knew that wasn't the right thing. And there is inappropriate people out there. So I
Hmm.
think for me, it's just the boundaries of it. If we could say that people have gender dysphoria and they go to the doctor and they're being supported through that, I think
Hmm.
that's different and it can be understood, versus people that are just putting on dresses and saying, identify me as a woman. Like,
Yeah.
again, and then all of a sudden they're getting all this support. There are people that are fucking dying in our country of diseases that could be helped because it's being
Yeah.
helped in other places, aren't being helped here. And you can't say it's because of money. I'd say it's because it's distribution. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, stop sending our money to other countries. There's also other rich countries in the world that can do that. We are
Hmm.
not one of those countries anymore. Especially, like,
Yeah.
strawberries is $7. A tiny thing of strawberries is $7 before 18% tax. So it's
It's
$10 to
insane.
get a thing of strawberries, right? Like, there's ways
Absolutely
that we could
insane.
be helping Canadians. And I feel like, to your point, we have DEI hires
Yeah.
or ideological hires in there that want to be popular at school. They want to be the
Yeah.
cool mom. And it's the cool mom now to validate people's feelings instead of
Yeah.
support them and figure out why they're feeling that way. Could you
Hmm.
imagine when I was a teenager if I went to the doctor and was like, I'm fat, you need to put me on Ozempic because I'm
Oh
fat,
my gosh.
because
Yeah.
the inside of my brain is telling me that I'm fat and I
Hmm.
need you to do this to be accepted and to be loved, and nothing else matters. Because when I was a teenager, 100%, I had forms of anorexia. That would not be done. That
Hmm.
would be a call for concern. I would be evaluated psychiatrically. You would
Hmm.
not give me Ozempic because my
Yeah.
inside, you would work through that. And I'm not saying gender dysphoria is the same thing, to be clear. People don't come at me. What I'm saying is, and it needs to be handled differently. But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is that you don't just go off of what a 16-year-old is saying is going inside their brain
Of
without
course.
further diving into it. You wouldn't just give them Ozempic. You would help support them live a healthy lifestyle and get them away from that ideology. And after all of that, you take it to the next step.
Yeah.
So, did this child get abused? Did
Yeah.
this child get put into the side of TikTok that says you feel weird about your boobs, you don't have big boobs, therefore you're a boy? Well, I don't have boobs. Does that mean I'm a boy?
Hmm.
I can't have a baby properly. Does that mean I'm a boy?
Yeah.
No, right? So, but again, people get so
They
heightened
get.
and you're a
Yeah.
transphobic for saying that. And it's like, no.
I'm again. I'm totally okay with that label
Or
because
yes, exactly.
I think that we need to be discussing this. And again, the ideology is gone too far. And, the average Canadian is confused by it. That's why last summer there were protests across the country. People don't want to talk about this, about LGBTQ in the classrooms.
Yeah,
And
so
a lot
G.
of parents were like, no, like
Mm-hmm.
they're too young. We can't be talking about this. And so many provinces were like on board with this idea until parent groups came out and said no. And the parent groups were of all walks, all political stripes, saying like, no, this is madness. And for once I was like, finally Canadians are speaking up. Like, this is great. And it's not against the community. I think all of us are like, of course, like, if you are trans, I can't imagine what it's like. In my podcast, I talk to folks who are trans, and they would tell me all the time, it's, first of all, it's hard to get an apartment because, people do discriminate on you on the basis of your looks. You're walking down the street, people yell absurd things, and they sometimes get physically confrontational and violent, especially late at night, especially in like the club districts. People do, like, it's hard to meet people. It's hard to, court someone into a partnership. Like, it's very challenging for people who are truly trans. Like they're I hate to say the phrase, but whatever. Like lived experience is real. Like
Yeah,
though there are very challenging
they're
things
valid
that they
concerns.
valid concerns. Getting a loan from the bank like was a
Yeah,
big deal
yeah.
because banks need your pronouns. They need to know all these things about you. So all of that said, yes, 100%. Like there are real discrimination that members of the community face. But I think the appropriate policy response isn't to overcorrect.
Mm-hmm.
It's to we have to start understanding that, building that awareness in our broader society, and not allow very few voices from that community to say that they speak on behalf of the community.
Yeah.
And I think the way we do that is we get more trans people of all walks of life speaking up
Mm-hmm.
about their experiences, because there's some trans people I've met who say the last thing I want to talk about is my sexual orientation and my gender identity.
Absolutely.
That's the last thing I want to tell you about because
Yeah.
that's so personal and I've gone through a lot and I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to talk about that. I just want to
No.
live a normal life.
Yes, yes.
But
Not
I find those
performative.
voices
There's like a
not performative.
performative, there's a performative trans community. Again, there's got to be
Yes.
activists, but there's a
Yeah.
difference, right? Where it's like, and I think that's where they have a communication within their own community, right? Because you have
Yeah.
people that are like, again, in the non-binaries and all those kind of things where they're like, okay, hold on, true people with gender dysphoria that have been around the OGs for the most part, from
Mm-hmm.
what I'm seeing, is that they're saying like, we don't want to even look close to the other gender. That's the whole point of our gender dysphoria, is to,
Yeah.
work so hard to be a person in society that gets accepted for the gender that they switched in. So bringing attention to that is the last thing that I want to do. It's again like the Streisand effect. Like
Yes.
there's people in our lives that we met before and we had no idea, and then they shared that with us, and we're like, oh, thank you for sharing. Had no
Yeah.
idea, wouldn't have any idea, and didn't have a
Wouldn't have
care
thought
to
that.
have it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't fucking matter to me.
Yeah.
It's when there's people that let lose their first name as their pronoun and you mess it up, or they're
Yeah.
they them, and then they scream at you and you're just like, you don't seem to know your identity. How am I supposed to know my identity? You
Mm-hmm.
and that's the difference, where it's like true trans people see those gender
Mm-hmm.
stereotypes and want to live within those. They're not mad against
Mm-hmm.
those. They're not angry. They just want to live on the side of them and
Mm-hmm.
function normally. They don't hate the other gender or the gender that they came from. They just don't want to identify with it. And I think that's the
Right.
difference in people's healings and their ability to regulate and react. And when we're constantly online, which I'm sorry progressive people generally are,
Yeah.
and like we other side is too, but I think we're a lot busy working and trying to like heal and figure out these triggers where it's just like continual online and not sitting in reality and like talking to people and having real conversations on either side. You're not actually advancing yourself. You're just
Yeah.
sitting in emotions and echo chambers and screaming. You're not advancing
Yeah.
your knowledge. And every time I try to come at stuff of how can I learn more? How can I be more empathetic while still
Yes.
having my boundaries of, like I don't think we should shame people, but I think we should a little
No.
bit. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah. Like there's parts of
maybe
your yeah.
maybe don't murder people. Like we should shame murderers, right? Like that's not a good thing to do. But someone that maybe like got in a
uh,
car accident because it just fucking happened and it was bad. Like,
yeah.
when I was 19, I lost, we had just broken up. I think we'd broken up for like 2 months, but just a past boyfriend. I'd lost him when I was 19,
Oof.
to a bike accident, a crotch
Oh.
rocket accident. And in that scenario, it was nobody's fault. It
Mm.
was nobody's fault. Sometimes bad things just happen. So I don't think
Mm-hmm.
we need to shame those people but let's shame the murderers, the people that are
Mm-hmm.
actually going out and doing that, right? So to just eliminate all shame in some areas, I think, and have no boundaries, no borders, no like those are where
Mm-hmm.
these extremes are. And to your point, liberals used to be anti-government. They used to
Yep.
want government out of their lives and their homes and their situations, and
Mm-hmm.
and we're conservatives, we're building those things and policies and putting in structure and business and whatever. And I feel like the pendulum has switched where conservatives are like, yeah, we need structure and we need this, but we don't want government dictating. We want freedom of choice. And the liberals are like, leave everything to the government. They know what's
Yeah.
best. Like,
Yeah.
in my lifetime,
What's happening?
that is why I went from like a liberal and seeing what they did to BC and living in a conservative focus. And I was like, whoa, conservatives aren't racist, like
No.
not that transphobic was a thing when I moved into Alberta, but you know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
not these bad people. They're actually very moderate and want
Yeah.
to see us go forward in the world. Like there's progression and then there's fucking craziness.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's elements within every party that's like
100%.
extreme, right? And
100%.
you as a leader, you have to, whittle those out because those extreme elements can derail your party. Um, but you're 100% right. I feel like government has this very active role, or at least they have very active roles in very specific segments of our life. And
Mm-hmm.
the fixation on sexual orientation and gender identity is very perplexing to me because it is so specific. It is so
Yes.
personal. It is, again, the most personal you could probably
Yeah.
ever get about someone. And yet I find people who, you mentioned earlier in our podcast about ego. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that people who are not all people, but some people who are sexual minorities use their sexual minority status as, well, I am uh,
Polyamorous,
polyamorous. I
bi
am a bisexual
sericist.
man, right? Or I'm a gay man or whatever. And like they use that as the quote unquote trump card to say, well, you don't have the right to speak to me because I'm a sexual minority. It's like, well, if you attach your being with your sexual identity, you're actually causing yourself the most amount of suffering because most people genuinely don't care. And it's not that they should care either. That's your life and how you want to live it. But if you put that front and center, what you're telling others is, this is how I not only identify myself, this is an extension of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And while that can be good in some instances, it's actually, I think, bad overall because who you are is beyond your sexual identity and gender
Absolutely.
orientation. Like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? It's so odd when people come to me sometimes. They'll say things like, "I didn't expect you to be like very more right of center in your speaking," and I'm like, "What did you think?" And they thought, "Oh, like you're NDP or whatever." I'm like, "Really? That's the vibe I give off? I need to like do
No.
some deep like self work because I need to wear this shirt everywhere I go. That's why I wear it." It's like, how did I get to this point? And
That's
I
fair.
think,
Just because you're
I don't know.
super kind, I think, and you come from it. Like, I think because too, on the other side, people don't think that the conservative or right side can come at
Are
anything
compassionate.
that are
Right.
compassionate, which is
Yeah.
so far fucking from
So
the
true.
truth. Like I
Yeah.
said, like, so I don't believe that giving drug addicts more drugs is compassionate.
Yes.
I
Right.
believe
Right.
supporting them to get off of them is the
Yeah.
thing. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I love drugs sometimes too. I get it. But being an addict and coming off of it,
Yeah.
like, I can now see. So, like, back to that point, though, I wanted to bring up because this came
Hmm.
across earlier in my thoughts is I have been to that side where I never thought I'd get off Tylenol 3. Like, there's no way that I
Mm.
could even have a whisper of a headache where I wouldn't go take a Tylenol 3.
Yeah.
Or I didn't think there would be a life event that I wouldn't be able to get through. Like, because I had friends pass away at a very young age. And
Mm.
I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to face life without these drugs. And now that I'm off it,
Yeah.
as bad as this sounds, like knock on wood, I don't know that I would ever return to that life no matter how bad real life got. So
Mm.
the fact that you could go from like, I don't think I'll ever survive anything, even a mild headache without this substance, to
Right.
I don't even want to take Advil. Yes, I still smoke a whole bunch of weed. I'm aware of that. I have cannabis. I am a huge stoner. I am aware. I was also a
Hmm.
stoner when I was doing pharmaceuticals too, so that really didn't change. But I don't go for pharmaceuticals. I don't even go for Advil. Like I have to
Hmm.
be really, really sick, and I'm talking like I've had fever for days and I'm puking before I'll take
Wow.
pharmaceuticals. So you really can, with the power of different healing, but it's not just one modality, and it's not giving access. If I was given more access to Tylenol 3, I don't know that I'd be here today. I
Right.
don't know that if those policies were in place where I couldn't just go to any pharmacy I wanted to get Tylenol 3, I don't know what would happen. Like,
Hmm.
and I worked for a dentist that didn't mind prescribing that to me. And I could just
Mm.
manipulate him to do that. And I would just get prescription, like if your environment doesn't change, if you don't have the support, things aren't going to change. But it can.
Hmm.
But it takes
Hmm.
your mindset, your want to, the support around you. So just throwing drugs and putting people in safe supplies when they're around other users isn't going to do that. Safe supply could work if you put them in a facility surrounded by healthcare professionals, support systems, other people going through rehab at the same time within their, understanding, right? Like
Hmm.
that's where I think that we can get to, and we absolutely can. But this woke ideology of let's just give people what they are and not shame them so they don't feel bad is not working, because then you're kind of giving them the green light to being like, go ahead and abuse drugs,
Yeah.
but don't do
Exactly.
it in public. Thank you for not doing it at
Yeah.
parks anymore. Like that was a bad, they
Yeah.
said. So just do it in the privacy
Yeah.
of your own home where most ODs end up happening and nobody can
Correct.
get to them because they're by themselves, right?
They're by
So
themselves. Yeah.
it's
No,
just
you're
like
100% right.
to your
I
point, is
think
people with feelings are just getting into places, and it's like, please have your feelings with facts as well, please.
correct. And I think that what you're doing with your podcast and the Open Minds podcast, I think what we're doing online is we're normalizing these conversations. And maybe, just maybe, when someone's scrolling through their Insta feeds, they'll see one of our clips and they'll be like, oh, really? Like, I want to learn more. And one thing I notice and I'm sure you get this a lot on Insta, is like people will DM you like reels of like interesting research you're not hearing about, of
Yes.
physicians, of doctors, of people who, again, you don't know, but they've studied, like microplastics in our water, for example,
Mhm.
and they're talking about the impacts that has, or masks. People don't want to talk about how, the COVID-19 masks that we all wore have just destroyed the environment. There were studies about like the plastics men were breathing in affected their testosterone levels, like
Mhm.
all types of things. I was like, guys, I'm not wearing a mask.
Never
I love my
again.
testosterone too much.
Yes, no, thank you.
But right, but it's things like that where I'm like, I'm so grateful for social media because
Mhm.
it's cultivating a community of people who are like, this is very important, and by the way, here's a really interesting creator who's sharing some insight that we need to talk about.
Yes.
And I think that is the real power we have, because if we rely in traditional media, or we rely in traditional voices,
Mhm.
they're not with it to an extent. The next prime minister is going to have had a social media account from when they were very young and would
Mhm.
have consumed a lot of social media. So I assume that that person, whether they'd like to believe this or not, will actually be aware of different policies, of
Yep.
different ideas that they wouldn't normally not have been exposed to in their community, on TV, talking
Mhm.
to their family, their friends. They're at least going to have been exposed to different things. And so
Yes.
I think that's where the power of social media really comes, and like the live streams and things like that, where people go off the rails. It's actually kind of neat to see,
It
because
is.
we need more of that.
Yeah.
I think it
I mean,
shapes
did you
people's
feel,
policy and ideas.
and like, don't be so afraid to be wrong.
Oh
Like,
my God, I'm wrong all the time.
and I think that's the most important thing, is like, that's again going back to ego. Like, don't worry. Like, opinion is
Yeah,
just an opinion, and it can be
it's
open
just an
to
opinion.
change, right? And
Of
how are
course.
we going to change that if we don't converse and learn new things? Because I grew up with a certain lens, you grew up with a certain lens,
Hmm.
and our experiences, traumas, wins, bads, all of that is going to shape what we feel and how these policies affect us differently. So I think it's
Hmm.
important to have these conversations, because my experience is going to be different from your experience, but I still care about your experience, and I want to make
Yeah.
sure that we're not always going to agree on everything, but having those
Yeah.
conversations helps us bring to common grounds, and like, and being able to be like, okay, you know what, like, abortion, like, that's so huge right now. I feel like
Yeah.
that is like the number one talking point in the federal election in the states right now,
Yeah.
because there's very
It's
mixed
crazy.
conversations happening, where
Yeah.
Trump actually isn't in for a ban, abolishing
No.
abortion, but of course that's what the Democrats are saying that he does, but he's actually voiced it that he does believe that. And again, that's another nuanced conversation with me and you have had a few times, but it's
Yeah.
like, we can have compassion that there are people that have like rape situations or financial situations, and we can
Sure.
support women's health, but again, there needs to be boundaries on it, because there are extremes, there are people that
Of
are taking
course.
advantage of those things. But the minute you have that conversation, and when I brought it up before, when it was going through the whole Roe v. versus Wade thing, and I brought it up on the podcast, especially
Yeah.
from someone that comes from like an infertility miscarriage background, where I feel like I was
Right.
able to like say my side of the coin, because my story kind of brings a different element that during the abortion conversation no one thinks about, is the infertile women that are dealing with miscarriages,
Yeah.
and being told that these clumps shouldn't matter to them, like, I could have gone out and lashed out to everybody and been like, watch what you're saying when you're talking about those clumps of cells, because I've been on the
Hmm.
floor bawling and questioning my identity as a woman, because I have had problems with that, right? But I
Hmm.
didn't, because I understand that everyone has different experiences, and I
Yeah.
want the right to be able to be supported in my fertility. You should be able to have the right in your reproductive health as well, with some boundaries, because there's certainly fucking boundaries on what we're able to access and the healthcare for the other end of the coin. But again,
Hmm.
because it's so politicized right now, the minute you talk about it and you're like, there should be boundaries on abortion, it's like, you're a Trump supporter, and you're not that I give a shit. Like, yeah, I do. I would vote for Trump. I have no problem backing that up and showing you the many reasons why I would support that man versus the coconut
Hmm.
tree woman. But like, and I'm not saying that she's not good, I just don't know what her fucking policies are, because she's been in power for how long and not made any
Yeah.
changes. And again, Canadians, keep in mind, if your politicians that are in right now are saying we're going to make all these changes once elected, but are the ones that are in power. I think that's a place to be like, hold the fuck up. Why
Yeah.
haven't you been doing this while you've been in power the whole time, understanding she's a VP, but you're still running for the
Yeah.
same team, right? So
Yeah.
again, like, guys, we're going
Very
into
odd.
BC is going into an election. We've talked about it tomorrow as this launches. So obviously, you guys hopefully have heard my episode 193. If not, you got 24 hours to fucking cram before you go into the polls
24
tomorrow
hours.
morning. Yeah, but at the same time, we have a national, well, not sorry, federal election that, I mean, Pierre is really trying to push
Yeah,
forward here,
push
but he's
for
not
sure.
going to get. So we definitely have that coming up in November 2025. So I
Mhm.
think for me and you, for the next year, I think both of us probably want to be focused on and want Canadians to focus on, okay, what are they saying? What are they actually doing? And notice how the tides are going to change on some things as we go into an election season
Yeah.
federally, and watch the hate campaigns come out, and try to detach yourself from the emotions and get to the fucking online looking. Look
Yeah.
at the policies. What are they actually voting in? So, and I don't know if this is Canada wide. I think it is. Where you can actually go and look and see what politicians voted on within your
Yeah.
area, right? So
Definitely.
look at the things that are important to you. What are they saying about them? But what are they actually voting in reality, right?
Agreed. Agreed. And I encourage everyone to, you know, I have written my MP so many times and he never replies. And
Asshole.
I've
Just kidding.
my last email to him was, I've noticed you haven't replied to my emails.
As per my million past
As
emails.
per my here's the thread from 2023, like it's yeah. But that even still, and I know a lot of Canadians probably think the same. They're like, why am I going to write this guy? He's never going to reply. I hear you. I hear everything that you're saying. I want to say that you writing matters. It matters so much. You not writing matters even more, because these politicians, and I won't say these, but many politicians, they thrive over your silence. When the Freedom Convoy and the Emergencies Act happened I just want to put this in perspective. In 2022, the Emergencies Act was put in place. It only took 168 MPs in the House of Commons to vote in favor of the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act took away most all of our civil rights. It prevented us from publicly gathering. It allowed the government to freeze bank accounts. I just want to put that on the table. Nobody wants to talk about that. All it took was 168 MPs to say yes to that. Now, to change the Constitution, we need we need Ontario or Quebec plus like 2/3 of the province to change the Constitution. Makes sense, right? Like, you need a vast majority of
Majority, yeah.
Canadians
Fucking
to
hope
agree,
so.
right? But to take away our civil rights and liberties,
Didn't take much.
168 MPs. That's all we need. I think that's absolutely absurd. I've written my MP several times to say that needs to change. I think the Emergencies Act should only be applied the same rules for the constitutional amendment. So, in my opinion, Emergencies Act, if you're really going to take the rights away from Canadians, we need 2/3 of the country on board. We need the provincial governments to say, "Yep, I agree, I agree, I agree," and we need all our provincial governments to say, like, "Yeah, this is too big a threat, and we can't have people gathering." But the reality is that all it took was 168 MPs in Ottawa to say yes to that, and so by us not writing into our MPs about that, allowed that to happen. And
Yep.
within 48 hours of people being like, this is crazy, Trudeau stopped it. But it should never have gotten to that level.
Yep.
We should all have, and I look down to the States, and many times the States, as wild and crazy as sometimes you might think it is, like they're very robust. They have a very robust civil society. Like,
They do.
I feel there are obviously lobby groups and all that. I get that. But when you listen to Senate hearings and you listen to Senate committee hearings and you hear the questions that are being posed to groups, it's like,
They're heavy
those
and
questions,
hard.
yeah. And
Yep.
like, why aren't we doing that in
I
Canada? Damn
know.
it. Like,
I
we
look
need to
at
be doing
Florida and
that.
I'm like, God damn it. All of the fucking
Yeah.
like senators in Florida always seem to say the things that I want to be said in our House of
Yes.
Commons instead of just being
Yes.
like insults. It's like, again, come
Yeah.
with facts. And I'm not saying Pierre doesn't. I
Come with
think out of
facts.
all people, Pierre has done a really good job of like,
Yes.
but I mean, like Trudeau's given him a lot of fucking facts to give. That's
Oh
the
my
problem
gosh.
too,
The
right? Like
lane is wide open.
you
Yeah.
are literally spoon feeding him
Yeah.
all of the bad things that you're doing right now. And that's what I mean. I would respect Trudeau more if he was like, you know what, guys, I got ahead of myself. I really thought
Yeah.
that I could help this country, and I really did come
I
from a place
fucked
where
up.
I fucked up. I
Yeah.
really came from a place of where I thought I could do this, and I'm not doing a good job. I
Yeah.
really want to listen to you guys. Like, I could fucking respect that and people
I
following
would
him,
so
but
respect that.
I cannot respect it now, and that's why I'm like, okay, maybe two wings of the same bird. I understand that, but at the same time, we can't have nobody. So can we
I
just
agree.
maybe try to do something? This is where my head comes from. Maybe try
Yeah.
and do something else, and to the point of, I feel there's more conservatives invested in politics and holding their
Yeah.
MPs, their MLAs, their premiers in place than liberals are, because it's like, again, like, oh well, I'll leave it up to them, and it's like where conservatives are like, this is affecting me X, Y, and Z. That's why I lean
Hmm.
more to the right, because it's a little bit more based in like, okay, these are nice policies and ideologies when you say it out loud, but what is actually happening right in real life?
Yeah.
And I just feel like, unfortunately, the left side is a little bit too living in the clouds or online, where we can pretend that life is a certain way, but when we get offline and we see what's happening in our real life by our gas bills, like, yo, I pay for premium
Yeah.
fuel in British Columbia. Okay, do you know how much money gas is for me? And you want to put
Yeah.
more carbon tax on me? Like,
Yeah.
and then all the bike lanes that are coming up, and then you're like, oh yeah, well,
Yeah.
Kelowna is turning into a fucking 15-minute city, where, a
Yeah.
lot of these things too, I believe, root in good thoughts of being like, this is going to help infrastructure, this is going to help this. But what we need to do is we need to go back and say, did that?
Yeah.
Did it? Is it? And not just be like, but they're saying, and this is what happened with me during COVID. You're telling me that we're watching this global clock of people dying
Yeah.
when I'm hearing it's like the flu. This doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand this. And that's where I started poking holes and looking for myself and having some sort of independence to be like, I'm going to fact check that. Because if you're just going to hire a
Hmm.
bunch of people and call them fact checkers that are just going to look on the internet to fact check, then I can be a fact checker too. And
Yep.
so I think in the next coming year, what we need to do is have more hard conversations about things that are nuanced that people are just yelling at each other at. I
Yep.
think we need to look at facts and look at what people are saying versus what's happening in real life. And I think we
Yep.
need to let some ego go and open up our empathy, a little bit of understanding that we might not have the same lifestyles. And maybe if we look
Yeah.
someone that's on the street or in this community or that community, we will have our prejudgments, because as humans, we're naturally going
We're
to.
natural. Yeah.
But what we do with that and how we act is
Yeah.
what matters. So you are going to have those things that they're going to come up, and we need to work on them in the inside. As long as you're not projecting that, treating people differently, I think that's where we need to focus on, is like, we can have differences. We can be like, I don't agree with the way that your culture does that. I wouldn't do that for
Hmm.
me. But you don't need to be like, get the fuck out of our country. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
disgusting. Like, that's
Yeah.
gross. Like, we're
100%.
not, we're built off of immigration. No matter
Yeah.
how
And
white you are, asshole, you're going to have some sort of lineage that came from
yeah.
immigration. So we're
Yeah.
all, even though our skin tones might be different skin tones, for the most of us, we all came from an
Yeah.
immigrant that, either blended with someone here, or, like, not saying that, but I'm just saying, like, at this
Yeah.
point
Of
and where
course.
we are as Canadians, there's not a separate, like, there is, but there's not. So let's all please come together as Canadians and not
Of course.
be
And our
so
country's Yeah,
division.
and our country's too damn big and rich. We need people. Like we need people to
100%.
come in and
Yes.
build our country up and to take it into the next generations, of course. And Canadian values and norms will come through. It may take time, of course, but it will come through. And that is going to be Canada of the future. The reality is we need people. We have the resources, we have the land. Like we have
Yes.
so much land,
So much.
we have so much opportunity here for people to come and build their life and make their life and contribute to Canada and the fabric of Canada and get involved in things that they normally would not have been involved in. And I think that's so beautiful. And I think that also you're totally right about ego. We have to let our ego go. We have to put on the radar for more and more politicians these tough conversations, whether they like it or not. They're going to have to be part of the online conversations that
Discourse.
are happening.
Yeah.
They can dismiss it, they can write it off, they can do whatever, but our voices are not going to go away. And
No.
I think the other thing is that there's so many people who just want moderate policy.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want extreme on any end.
Mm-hmm.
They want moderate policy. And I know for many progressives, open and honest discourse is scary because it challenges their thinking at the core. It
Yeah.
challenges their thinking at the
Yeah.
core. When I talk about LGBTQ issues, people say, oh, and I say some of these surgeries are experimental. People say, oh, that's like transphobic. I'm like, it's not, actually not. The World Professional Association on Transgender Health says a lot
Mm-hmm.
of these gender affirming surgeries are experimental because we don't know.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
like, if we're not talking about it, Trudeau and others win because they're like, well, I'm putting forward this policy. No one's
Mm-hmm.
talking about it.
Yep.
So
Must
here
be
you
right.
go.
We must be
It
doing
must be
good.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm supporting the LGBTQ community. I'm like, well,
I agree.
actually, you might not be. Um,
And that's
so
the point with the drugs too. Like, are you're supporting
yeah,
safe supply to get people better, but like, but what's the result of that? What do people actually feel? And if you create a society
right.
that people can't share how they actually feel based on their experiences, then we're
Yeah,
only getting the people that feel safe enough or brave enough to speak out about it. And I don't think that's the
yeah,
right way. I want people in all walks of life to speak out so we can get a true 360 of problems, not just who feels empowered to or who like on social media feels like they can speak about it, like
yeah,
because it does all matter, like even coming back to like I feel like I can't speak on certain things because I am white on the outside, and that makes me sad because like then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, well then I'm believing like, am I a racist? And that's like, well, you're not speaking out
hmm
on these problems, and you're it's like, but I do speak out, and I'm told that I need to shut the fuck up because it's not,
yeah,
and like people get in these little spaces, and it's like, why can't we? If you have a heart beat, I feel like you can
yeah,
have an opinion, and I think if you can hear an opinion, you need to do the work to regulate that. People are just going to have different opinions, and if unless they're causing you physical violence
yeah,
or actually causing you violence, like you have to
yeah.
kind of learn to just let go, because you're
Let it
never going to
go.
make everybody happy. You're never going to.
Yeah, and
Yes, my
that's
cat
okay.
scratching. And that's okay. And I think that we need to see how beautiful other people, like, and again going back to like culture and stuff, like I want to learn what other cultures do. I think we've talked about this before. Like I think that's progression, learning other cultures and blending them all together and learning that. And
hmm
it's like, I'm not trying to appropriate your culture. I want to know more about it. I want to learn so that we can grow. And like, how does some of the things that you do at home where you came from blend into here, and how could we kind of like adapt to make
Yeah,
you feel like at home while at the same time holding Canadian values so everyone here feels safe as well, right? But
of
instead, it's like
course.
such a heightened conversation of one side being like, well, you're being racist for even questioning why a family, like,
Yeah,
it's like, oh, well, in their country, that's normal. And it's like, oh, you're racist. It's like,
yeah.
no, I'm just telling you that's how
It's
it
not for
is.
me.
So when they
Yeah,
come here, they're not maybe accustomed to those values yet because they're so used to that over there. It's not that I'm saying it's a racist thing. It's just they come from a different part of the country and they have to
man.
adapt as well as
Yeah,
we have to adapt. So, like, why can't we just have that adaptation conversation? I love your idea of giving new Canadians like a package of like what is
yes.
normal in culture, what is like, like not normal, but what is
Socially
socially
acceptable.
acceptable, or how can
Yeah.
you best highlight the country you just came to and add to it, because if I was going to a new country, I'd want to just add to it and be a part of
hmm
the positive. I don't think people come here, and I mean, I'm sure there are some, but I don't think most people
Yeah.
come here and like, I want to destroy the place, like,
I want to get rid of this.
I want to
Yeah,
get rid of
like,
this. Like, you came here to live a better life. I think they also want to be equipped with the ways of how they can do that so that they do feel like they can
of
be more
course.
Canadian as fast
Yeah.
as possible. I don't think that's a bad thing, but somehow that's
No.
racist. I don't know.
Yeah, and I feel like we're like, there are three pillars to my social acceptance piece, and one was like, just understanding the Highway and Traffic Act. I feel like in some ways we're like giving out, I mean, it sounds terrible to say that, but like the driver license thing, like just because
Yes.
you're a driver in a different part of the world has no bearing on Canadian customs and norms here. And like there needs to be a reorientation to the Highway and Traffic Act here, I mean, you've seen it, I've seen it. Downtown Toronto's wild. Like, there are people who blow through intersections, blow through red lights, blow through stop signs, and it's not it's not their fault. They are accustomed to a very different environment where that was the norm, because in many ways a traffic stop sign system isn't really the best, most efficient use of traffic. It needs to keep moving,
Mhm.
so like North American traffic laws, sometimes some may say it's archaic because roundabouts make more sense. Like there are
Yep.
studies in Europe where they've removed all traffic markers, like for
Yep.
lanes, and
Yep.
people are actually more efficient in using the road than with the markers, because people are like, this is my lane, I'm staking in it. But when there are no lanes, people are like, okay, I
More
need to get
mindful.
here. they're more mindful of like everyone on the road, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that the cyclist needs to get there, the pedestrian needs to cross, like everyone needs to kind of just make eye contact and be more aware. So I understand when you come to Toronto or Vancouver or any part of Canada, that needs a reorientation because
Mm-hmm.
we are very rigid in how we structure our lanes.
Yep.
um and the same is true with like personal hygiene. People don't want to talk about this. It
Mm-hmm.
is a normal, socially acceptable thing here in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
It's our cultural norm, and we don't talk about it because it's a cultural norm. You don't talk about cultural norms,
Yeah, yeah,
you
they're just
know,
there.
like they're just there. Like
Yeah.
I know my friends from India, they tell me that back in their communities, it's very much a cultural norm.
Mm-hmm.
If you're walking down the street and you go, let's say I'm walking down the street and I'm by your house, I'll be like, oh, there's Brandy. Let me go spend the night at Brandy's house, and she's going to cook for me because I ran out of groceries or whatever. Like, it's very culturally known.
Yeah.
That can't happen here. Like,
No, we can't
it's
afford
just
that. Get the
not.
fuck out of my
Can't
house.
afford it. Yeah, yeah. Strawberries are $7. Get
Yeah,
the hell
you
out.
want $10, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and
Yeah.
I don't. Where are you gonna sleep? Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, it's this whole thing. So
Yeah.
it's not culturally normal. So there are things that you have to adapt to in
Totally.
Canada, and we're so reticent because I think we're just too polite as a country
Mm-hmm.
to actually say this is an issue, and it is an issue. And I'm telling you, it is festering deep resentment towards immigrants because we're not talking about it.
Yep.
And there's a possibility, like we've seen in Germany and the UK, where um, there can be xenophobia, and that
Mm-hmm.
can happen here in Canada. It's very
Absolutely.
real, but we need to the way to kind of rectify that is by establishing norms, being open about that, helping people understand those norms, and just being okay having those tough conversations. And there's ways we can do this. It doesn't have to be over beating people over the head with our Canadian flag. No, it's like
Yes, no.
there's ways to do that, and there's appropriate ways to do that.
Yeah, and I think that starts too at this is the basic Canadian level of just the citizens.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like, yeah, it has a lot to do with policy and government, and we can sit there and can you see my cat's playing with my lights?
No, nice. Nice.
He's usually pretty good.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think like again, it starts at the citizen level, like yes, policies and all that, but we as Canadians have to be, like better at having the conversations, and because we're the ones
yeah,
on social media, these are the people
yeah,
that are making these comments, and on either side of them, like there's people that come here too and have said pretty shitty things and being like,
yeah,
like I fucking hate your country. I hate all Canadians, like there's extremes on both sides. And I think,
yeah,
again, we just have to take our egos out, have the
yeah,
conversations, and not be afraid on all of these levels. And I think, like you said, podcasts like ours are having those conversations. I'd rather not talk about like whatever's trending right now. I want to talk about what's going on in
the real
Canada,
stuff. Yeah,
the real stuff. I want to talk about what's going on with our policies. I also want to
yeah,
talk about what are happening to real life people in all aspects of life, because I feel like everything is a business and being sold. I feel like
yeah,
everything is about marketing, and marketing misleads, and marketing doesn't have real life experiences. And
yeah,
so
of
with
course.
marketing, I feel like you can't have real conversations because it's just selling one way or the other on one side. Where you come from
Mm-hmm.
human experience, there's so much nuance and so many of like
Mm-hmm.
so many truths can exist at the same time, and that's just life. And also,
Yeah,
I guess it all depends down on truly what your religious or spiritual belief is of what you're here on earth. Because
yeah,
from my understanding for the last little bit, and what I like to lean into lately is that, we have human designs and we have contracts, and there's lessons that we're here to learn on earth. So
yeah,
if we're here to learn bad things to gain ascension and knowledge and all of that, then bad things are going to happen. We can't eliminate them. But it can take the personal piece out of it, and it can take that we're all against each other, more that we're all students of life and we're all learning these
mm-hmm.
lessons together and pulling different education. Some people are going through tests, some people are going through learning lessons, some people are going through study breaks, some people
Yep.
have no hamster on the wheel, and that's up to them. That's fine.
Yep.
That's their timeline and their time to learn. But I think if we
Mm-hmm.
could just take reactions out of it, and we can just have honest talks, and really work on self-awareness, community awareness, we'll get a lot
Mm-hmm.
further. So I really would like to encourage people to have conversations about the things that we talked about today with your
Mm-hmm.
most closest people. And I think you can always lead with, hey, I want to start talking about things that we not maybe get along with. Can we maybe
Yep.
try a topic together? And if it's too much, let's back off and reset, right? Like,
Yep.
I just think you need to start having them in your homes. Thanksgiving's coming, y'all. It's time. Or
Yep.
no, Thanksgiving would have passed already by the time this. Okay, Christmas is coming. Let's start having
Christmas is
political
right there.
conversations at the dinner
Yes.
table. Just kidding, not really,
Get it
but
out there.
get
Get
it
out
out
there.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But start talking honestly. Start being real. Start being
Yeah.
open-minded. I think those are where our podcasts come from.
Yes.
Being open-minded and being real. I think
Yes.
will push people forward. Christopher, this has been an amazing conversation. We hit
Thank
so
you.
much
Yeah.
more
This
than
is
I even
great.
imagined. But just before we log off today, if those want to follow you, where can we find you on social media, and where's your podcast and all that fun stuff?
Definitely. Thanks, Brandy. So you can follow me on Instagram at OpenMindsPod. Follow me on TikTok at Christopher Balkaran, Balkaran. You can find me anywhere you stream music. Open Minds Podcast with Christopher Balkaran. Where else am I? Check out my website, openmindspodcast.com. And yeah, I'm trying to get everywhere.
I love
Starting
it.
up my
Same.
YouTube channel, which is going great too. So I'm trying to again be as what's the word?
Central.
Anyways, trying to be everywhere all at once,
Yes, that's fair.
but what I'm finding too is that different platforms have different communities. So
Different opinions.
and different opinions.
Mhm.
Instagram, I find like people have really gravitated to me, but Instagram is starting to like shadow ban a lot of my content.
I
But
feel that.
YouTube and TikTok have been great. So
Yep.
definitely check it all out. It's all there, and I hope people who find me appreciate that I'm actually trying to approach these things with genuine curiosity. I don't have the answers, but I'm trying to kind of find different opinions out there so we can get to a better place in our politics.
Yes, and I appreciate that you have that. And I appreciate all the different guests that you have on to bring in,
Yeah,
like conversations from all different people, right? Like that's I think
yeah,
the one thing that I love is that you go for the people that are in that and that are, really focused on it educationally, like those are their jobs. And then it's like on my side, it's like I'm bringing the people that are getting affected by this everyday Joe Blows that, do
mm-hmm.
feel affected by these super policies or these lies that have come out. And I think if we could just continue having these conversations, we'll get
Yes,
so much further ahead as individuals, as Canadians, as world people, and let's
yeah,
start opening up to more and being open and honest with our conversations and not be afraid of
yes,
cancel culture, because you can actually only cancel yourself. No one can actually cancel you.
agreed. Yeah,
So don't be
agreed.
afraid of it. And once you go through it and you have your first
Yeah,
fight, yeah, it's
yeah,
anxiety, but it
yeah,
ends
yeah,
and you get
yeah,
over it and you do not die. So talk
yeah,
lives.
exactly.
Make sure you're following Christopher. And as always, guys, thanks
Yes.
for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And until next time, bye. Thank you guys so much for the support. I cannot thank you enough for being here. If you like this episode and you want to hear more, please give me a follow at the Be Real Babe podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, and Pinterest. You can also find me on Facebook at the Be Real Collective. Until next time, guys, bye.